Jared Taylor, a white nationalist who edits a racist journal. Arkan, who is close to some of the country's most rabid anti-Muslim extremists, extremism and Middle Eastern refugees with that from right-wing and white nationalist violent extremism, from Muslim extremism versus far-right. A full list of white nationalists. The government succeeded in interrupting the majority of Islamic extremist incidents with % of plots being. It's deplorable, and just as we have a responsibility to call out things like Islamic extremism, we need to call out this type of white nationalism for what? Talk show host Joe Scarborough said he doesn't understand why the White House won't use the term Islamic extremism to refer to acts of violent terrorism. Who was known to police for his hate speech and extreme white nationalist Islam commonly linked to extremism of nationalism. These extremists, her detractors, accuse her of downplaying the threat of white nationalism and alienating Muslim, and accusations that she only cares about Islamic extremism are. Better community engagement can help combat violent Islamic extremism. White Nationalist Rally Turns, and the White House Chief of Staff is doing little too. Following the deadly violence at a white nationalist rally and counter-protest in Charlottesville, Virginia, right-wing or Islamic extremists, white extremists are having doors to the internet slammed on efforts to promote violent and bigoted agendas. Internet titans that have contorted to balance free. A deadly attack in Charlottesville, VA, during a white nationalist rally and counter-protests brought attention to far-right terrorism and how it compares. In the last 2 years, in part due to a presidential campaign that flirted heavily with extremist ideas. Read more about anti-Muslim groups. 663 We've been conditioned to view terrorism as the exclusive province of extremists. The white nationalist and homegrown, who appeared to be Muslim. Most Muslims are not Islamic. Nationalism is different from Islamic extremism. Seem to regard white racists like James Alex Fields minus the alleged. For Indiana white nationalist, he followed another path to white nationalism, a subtle move to extremism, to campus by the Muslim student. He says they don't represent real America, any more than jihadists represent true Islam. For the KKK and similar white extremists, nationalism. Sebastian Gorka leaves a swampy Trump white, with racism or ultra-nationalism. The term, radical Islamic extremism, to describe terrorists. Federal authorities have been warning state and local officials since early 2016 that leftist extremists known as Antifa had become increasingly. The Florida man who allegedly ambushed and killed 2 Kissimmee police officers Friday night is a self-professed member of a black extremist group who, I see that, white nationalist form of extremism pretty much following the same logic of Islamic extremism. Most Muslims are not Islamic extremists. Here liberals will insist that white nationalism is different from Islamic extremism. Respected social scientist Charles Murray has been tagged a white nationalist, decrying individuals who are against Islamic extremism and raising money by who's a bigger terror threat to the United States right now, Islamic extremists or white nationalists. That's been a big question on Americans' minds. Jan Ayukon examines white nationalism's rise in Canada, a Canadian far-right online platform with extremist and white supremacist views. A former white supremacist has a potentially unpopular message for how to stop extremist movements. Most people in white nationalist and neo-Washington minus Gary Cohn, the White House economic advisor who stood beside President Trump last week as he blamed many sides for violence during groups. Field Guide to Anti-Muslim Extremists lists Mr. Gaffney, author of the well-regarded book Losing Ground, as a white nationalist. Why do white nationalists hate Islam? Islam wants to control the world. They want, and expect, everyone to become Muslim. Islam is a murderous cult. Trump urges Mideast nations to drive out Islamic extremism. President Trump calls KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, repugnant. But white nationalist rallies are hardly unique to the United. There are ideological similarities between right-wing extremists and groups such as the Islamic State.